Liberation Day, as you know.
How much have you had to pay in tariffs so far this year?
Yeah, so far this year, right around $200,000, which for a lot of businesses may not be a whole lot, but we're a pretty small one, and so that is a significant new cost.
We need to pass them on, but we're unable to calculate the exact price increase due to the chaos around the tariffs. They're constantly changing from week to week, so we're unable to implement a price increase yet.
In 2025, American factories aren't coming home. They're moving to Canada. The industrial heartland is reeling as brands once considered untouchable symbols of U.S. strength quietly shift north. Coca-Cola, Tesla, Heinz, and Ford have all begun relocating production into Ontario and Quebec. Communities in Pittsburgh, Michigan, and Ohio are watching assembly lines fall silent. Shifts get cut, and once bustling plants sit in uneasy stillness. The proud label Made in America is being replaced by Made in Canada, leaving workers wondering whether protectionism has become its cruelest betrayal. The shock intensified on August 1st, 2025, when Donald Trump raised tariffs on Canadian imports from 25 to 35%. Instead of stopping the exodus, it fueled it, pushing more companies across the border. The unavoidable question now hangs over Washington. Has the trade war safeguarded American jobs, or simply handed them to Canada? This industrial migration was no accident. It was engineered by America's own policies. A 50% tariff on aluminum, designed to shield U.S. industry, became the very trap that drove companies away. By making raw materials more expensive, Washington raised the cost of doing business at home to unsustainable levels. Aluminum cans, once the most basic input for beverages and packaged foods, suddenly became a premium item. Production plans intended to bring factories back to U.S. soil collapsed under inflated costs. For companies, it wasn't patriotism deciding plant locations. It was math. Executives pointed to problems far beyond tariffs. High energy prices, a slow and bureaucratic permitting system, and constant union unrest added layers of unpredictability. Strikes delayed operations. Labor negotiations consumed months. Every delay made Canada look better. Just across the border, Quebec and Ontario offered not only cheaper hydroelectric power, but also fast approvals and generous government support. While U.S. factories stalled in red tape, Canadian plants switched on their lights and began production. What was sold as protection quickly revealed itself as a burden, pushing industry north one decision at a time. The aluminum trap's casualties came quickly. One of the first was a brand so deeply tied to American identity that its shift still feels unthinkable: Coca-Cola. What once stood as a symbol of U.S. culture is now increasingly manufactured not in Georgia or California, but in Brampton, Ontario. By 2025, the numbers told the story. A majority of Coca-Cola cans sold in North America now roll off Canadian production lines. Tariffs on aluminum made domestic can production too expensive, while Canada offered a cheaper and more reliable alternative. Instead of paying inflated costs at home, Coca-Cola rebuilt its supply chain around Ontario, where everything could be produced and delivered more efficiently. Logistics were restructured almost overnight. Hundreds of trucks now cross the border daily, carrying freshly filled cans into U.S. supermarkets, gas stations, and vending machines. For American consumers, the product still looks the same, red and white script, but behind the label, the reality has changed. Made in America no longer applies. Executives insisted the move was pragmatic, not political. Rising input costs left little choice, and Canada's environment made the transition seamless. For workers in shuttered U.S. plants, corporate calm was no comfort. If Coca-Cola's quiet relocation symbolized nostalgia slipping away, Tesla's move told a story about the future. The company that once defined California's innovative identity has anchored one of its most critical operations not in Silicon Valley, but in Quebec. Near Montreal, Tesla now produces its cutting-edge 4,680 batteries, the power source behind the Cybertruck, Model Y, and Semi. These aren't outsourced components. They are the core of Tesla's vision for electric transport. And Canada secured them with a package the U.S. couldn't match: over $1.2 billion in government support, access to some of the cheapest clean power in the world, and regulatory processes that move with speed instead of stalling in bureaucracy. For Tesla, Quebec offered what California no longer could, a 3-in-1 advantage of low-cost energy, generous subsidies, and efficient approvals. The deal turned the province into an investment magnet and reinforced Canada's ambition to lead the green economy. Meanwhile, Tesla urged Washington to exempt graphite imports from China, warning of looming battery shortages. But as debates dragged on in D.C., Canada simply built. The result is impossible to ignore. The next generation of American electric vehicles is being powered not by American soil, but by Canadian industry that if Tesla's batteries pointed to the future, Heinz's ketchup struck at everyday life. Few products feel as ordinary or as American as a bottle of ketchup on the dinner table. Yet by 2025, most Heinz ketchup consumed in North America no longer comes from California's fields or Midwestern plants, but from Leamington, Ontario. The move wasn't just about tariffs. California's relentless droughts made tomato farming unreliable. Rising labor costs added pressure. Aluminum packaging became too expensive under U.S. tariff regimes. Every factor that once made California the natural home for Heinz turned into a liability. Ontario offered a different story: stable water supply, predictable labor, and lower input costs. The pattern repeats across industries. U.S. policies meant to protect domestic jobs have instead driven them abroad. While American plants sit idle under the weight of high costs, Canadian facilities hum with activity, supported by cheap power and streamlined government incentives. For companies, moving north isn't about waving a flag. It's about staying profitable. For American workers, the cost of protectionism is measured not in abstract trade balances, but in empty parking lots, locked gates, and paychecks that never come. The label may still say Coca-Cola, Tesla, or Heinz, but the meaning of Made in America is fading. Replaced, can by can and battery by battery, with Made in Canada. With a steadier climate, strong government subsidies, and lower overall costs, Leamington emerged as a new tomato capital of North America. The factory once mourned as closed in 2014 was revived and expanded between 2020 and 2025, transforming into a powerhouse of production. Today, roughly 60% of all Heinz ketchup sold in the US and Canada is bottled in Ontario. For many Americans, the brand still carries the aura of Pittsburgh and Midwest tradition, but the ketchup on backyard tables and in school cafeterias increasingly traces its roots to Canadian soil. It is a quiet symbol of how American products have shifted geography, sometimes without consumers even noticing that if Heinz revealed subtle changes to daily life, Ford's decision struck at the heart of U.S. industry. The Super Duty pickup truck, long celebrated as a backbone of American work culture, is no longer assembled in Detroit. Its production now hums at the Oakville complex in Ontario. The reasons are stark. U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum, intended to protect domestic supply, pushed costs higher. Union strikes and prolonged labor disputes turned Detroit into a place of paralysis rather than productivity. Every delay cost millions, and every walkout sent executives searching for stability elsewhere. Canada seized the moment. Ottawa and Ontario jointly offered a $590 million incentive package, alongside an environment free of the disruptions plaguing U.S. plants. Ford responded with scale, a $3 billion expansion, including $2.3 billion earmarked for Oakville, creating 1,800 initial jobs and setting the stage for more growth. And it isn't just trucks. A growing share of parts that once fed U.S. assembly lines, from frames to electronics, are now made north of the border. For Detroit's workers, the message was devastating. The very vehicle once sold as proof of America's resilience is now built under Canadian roofs. For Canada, the Super Duty became more than a truck. It became a trophy, proof that America's own policies had handed its neighbor the keys to an industry once seen as untouchable. By the time Ford crossed the border, it was clear this was no longer about a handful of high-profile companies. What began as isolated moves had grown into a chain reaction, a full-scale redirection of America's supply chains toward Canada. Each month brought new announcements, each one chipping away at the foundation of U.S. manufacturing. Walmart, often seen as a barometer of American consumer life, quietly shifted production of its private labels, Great Value and Equate, into Canadian plants. For shoppers in Ohio or Texas, the packaging looked the same, but more and more goods inside were made in Ontario and Quebec. General Motors followed with one of its most strategic decisions yet. Building electric vehicle frames in Baie-Comeau, Quebec, where low-cost hydroelectricity and government incentives outpace anything offered south of the border. That move not only secured GM's future in the EV race, but also tied the next generation of American cars to Canadian infrastructure. Even Campbell's Soup, long synonymous with American kitchens, chose to avoid inflated U.S. steel costs by shifting production to Ontario. Every can of soup in U.S. grocery aisles became a subtle reminder of how protectionism had backfired, and the ripple effect didn't stop there. In the first 5 months of 2025 alone, Canada's chocolate exports to the U.S. surged by 10%. Aerospace components, home appliances, and other goods that once carried the proud stamp of U.S. manufacturing now increasingly bear the label Made in Canada. The migration reached critical mass, spreading far beyond a few headline brands and into everyday products of American life. The pattern is undeniable. If this drift north continues, the United States risks losing more than jobs. It risks losing the very symbols of its economic power. The proud stamp of Made in America is giving way to labels printed in Ontario and Quebec, sold back into the very markets that once defined U.S. dominance. The chain reaction is already visible, from factory workers in Pittsburgh watching their shifts disappear to Walmart shelves quietly filling with Canadian-made goods. This transformation cuts through every layer of American life. What was once a seamless North American economy has fractured into a border-defined divide, one where Canada now holds the initiative. In this new reality, Canada increasingly resembles the California of the continent, a magnet for talent, investment, and production, and yet the haunting question remains. Can the United States reverse this tide, or has it already pulled the trigger on its own decline? What happens when America's most formidable economic competitor isn't across an ocean, but just across its northern border? If Made in Canada becomes a new default for North America, how much of America's future has already slipped away? Thanks for sticking around. If you found this valuable, like and subscribe to support more content like